Today on Market Journal, did you stand up to be counted for the latest Ag Census? It helps shape farm assistance and policy. We'll see what the numbers tell us this time around. It's hard out there for a dairy farmer. Learn some of the top issues facing milk producers and where the industry stands. And spray it, don't say it. Getting ready to plant means clearing your fields of weeds. Hear what our expert recommends to get the job done. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hoping you've had a good week. We've got our final show of April today and lots to cover as well. Beginning our show, and the results are in. Earlier this month, the USDA released the 2017 Ag Census, a report that comes out every 5 years and provides valuable insights into economics, demographics, and what's happening on U.S. farms and ranches. According to the census, there are 46,332 farms in Nebraska, which is a 7% decrease from the 2012 census. That's in line with a national decline of 3.2% in the number of farms. Statewide, the number of livestock operations, farmland acres, and net income per farm is also lower this time around. USDA Deputy Regional Director Nick Streff joined me on the show to take an even deeper dive into the numbers.
Well, for the census, it's the one time every 5 years that USDA NASS conducts county-level data for nearly every data point we can think of. So when you think of our normal USDA programs, we're collecting corn data, soybean data every year, but the census gives us the county-level data for popcorn, for the number of hog farms in a certain county. And it's the first time you can look at all the counties across across the country and compare it.
And you were telling me that you were around when the 2012 census was conducted. What were some key figures that stood out to you this time around versus last time?
Well, some of the key figures that stood out this time around is when we're looking at the farm numbers. Farm numbers have been going down, and looking at of all the categories, nearly every category is going down except for the 2,000 plus acre farms. Those have gone up. So that's an area where you can look at supporting different types of farms, with farm programs. So that was one thing that did stand out to me.
And Nick, what were some of the things that were asked in this census that were new this time around?
A question that is new this time around was how we asked the operator question. In the 2012 census, we only asked about 3 operators, but based on feedback from data users of our statistics, they asked if we could expand that. So this time around, we asked about 4 operators. So we came up with more operators this time around, so it's not as comparable, but it's showing that there's a lot more people involved in the decision makings of the farms. For producers, sole proprietors are still our number one for Nebraska, one operator, one farm, but we do know that there are larger family farms, that there's a lot of people involved in that decision-making process. And it also gave us a better chance to pick up, the younger producers that are involved in the farms, female producers, and the whole works from there.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Demographics, what were some of the key takeaways here?
Some of the key takeaways there is one demographic we picked up, which was a new question, was the number of military operators in the census. Nebraska had around 6,700 farms that have someone military service. Also, we picked up more female producers, but that's also a result of that question expanding that question. So just showing that there's a more diverse background there in Nebraska and across the country.
All right, so hogs, beef, dairy, what were some of the main points with this?
For hogs, beef, and dairy, Nebraska is big in all those things, especially the hogs and the beef side of things. And it's showing that Nebraska is still a strong contributor in those areas. Cumming County is the number 6 for cattle on feed inventory. They were big last census. They're big this time around. On the hog side of things, it can really show us, how dispersed hogs are. We can see how they're spread across our state, whether in the eastern side or in the western side of the state, which is what the census really helps show us at the county level.
And Nebraska number 4 in ag sales. When you look at it state by state, that seems like a pretty good accomplishment.
Yes, Nebraska is a strong player. And also you can see from the census, we can get a good look at those irrigated acres, which is a big positive for Nebraska on the production side of things. You know, Nebraska is the #1 popcorn producing state. So that's a data point that we normally don't get to publish, but we can see it in the census.
Any other Nebraska-specific data that you'd like to mention?
Well, something else I'd like to mention is that Nebraska has 81% of the farms have internet access compared to just 75% at the U.S. level. So that's good to show that, you know, our farms are adopting technology, looking for it, and they have the internet access that helps them get that technology.
And finally, I'm sure people have questions. How is the data collected and how is the accuracy of these numbers determined? What's the process there?
Well, the process for this is we do a large list building effort to build up the mail list for our census. For this time around, we mailed out roughly 59,000 questionnaires, knowing that not all of them are farms, but we just want to make sure our list is as complete as it can be. And then from there, we did 2 mailouts. We did a phone follow-up. We did a postcard follow-up. We allowed producers to respond online, multiple ways for people to respond to us. And then we spend about the first 6 months of 2018 going through the data, making sure it's correct, calling producers back if it's not, just trying to make sure the data can be as accurate as possible to make sure we're putting out a good product. Because once again, this is the county level data we're going to have for the next 5 years for decision makers to look at to base their decisions on.
The response rate for the 2017 Ag Census was almost 72%. All total, the report is about 800 pages, and you can look through it yourself at agcensus.usda.gov. We've also posted a link to it on the Market Journal Facebook page. Moving on now, and over the last several years, the dairy industry has been hit with some hard times. As if declining milk prices weren't enough, last month's flooding threatened to compound problems even more. However, as much as the flooding has impacted agriculture in general, it appears the local dairy industry saw minimal damage. Nebraska Extension educator Kim Clark stopped by to discuss those issues, as well as the latest developments in dairy.
So first of all, as we know, Nebraska saw significant impacts related to the flooding, major impacts related to agriculture in general. As I visited with producers, thankfully, we were minimally impacted. At most, you know, we had to dump a couple tanks of milk, but because of planning, so planning for feed location, where dairies were going to be placed, as dairies were being built years ago, our impact was very minimal with the flooding. So we were pretty prepared. It's going to take agriculture in general a long time to recover from this.
Yeah, that's for sure. What are some of the biggest challenges producers are facing right now, whether it's flooding or otherwise? Because I know it's always in the news that dairy industry has been hit with some hard times lately.
The dairy industry for the last few years has really been struggling with the milk prices. That's probably the greatest impact. We hit a high about 6 years ago with our milk prices, and ever since then we've seen them decrease. And so trying to recover from then, from those milk prices takes a little bit. And if we look at the economic projections for the end of the year, we should see an increase in milk prices, not enough to help with the producer's bottom line, but they will give a little bit of relief.
When you talk to folks throughout the state, what's on the top of their mind as far as their main concerns?
So milk prices is a main concern. Labor, finding labor that is skilled and finding labor that will remain on the farm and do their duties as they need to is a major challenge for us as well. Weather is always a challenge. You know, we just finished up with the flooding, so some of the flooding impacts really wet pens, which leads to wet animals needing to provide additional care for them. So those are probably the greatest impacts that we're seeing right now.
Have you seen that there's a lot of dairy farmers throughout the state who are leaving the industry?
We have had a number of smaller farms leaving the dairy industry, smaller, you know, your 50, 100 cow dairies. Those that are a little bit larger, you know, a couple hundred cows that they're milking, that have financial plans, plan for economics and down the road, they're a little better placed, so we're not seeing as many of those exit as we could have.
So as far as the current state of the industry, financial health in the industry, what are the main takeaways? Is it just related to the pricing, you think?
I think pricing this year specifically really recovering from the flood. We have a number of fields that lost some nutrition and soil health because of the flooding, so we'll see some impacts there. If you think of dairy farmers, a lot of them grow their own feeds, so the corn and soybeans and corn silage that they feed their animals. And without that soil health and nutrition in the ground, it's going to play an impact for the feeds that we provide our dairy animals.
What's some advice that you have for dairy farmers who may be struggling during this time?
So one advice I have is look online for resources. And one of the resources that we have here with Nebraska Extension is the flood.unl.edu resource page. You can find any information there. For agriculture, it's related to if you lost animals, how can you deal with that? How do you deal with any animals that were lost related to burial? How do you get your soil health back? So look for the resources on that flood.unl.edu resource page. You'll be able to get most of your questions answered there.
All right. And finally, any current research that you're taking part in or that you'd like to share with our viewers?
For the past few years, we've been working on greenhouse gas emission research, so methane emission research related to the dairy industry. And so we're continuing that research. If we look at our long-term goals for where we want to be in greenhouse gas reduction, some of this current research that we're doing will be related to that.
Currently, Nebraska ranks as the 26th largest milk-producing state and generates more than $232 million in milk sales annually. Time now for this week's trivia question, and let's stick with the dairy theme on this one. Here we go for this week. Per year, how many glasses of milk does the average dairy cow produce? Your choices are A, 15,000, B, 32,000, C, 46,000, or is it D, 75,000? Make your guess, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. It's the time in the show when we get a check on the markets. The dip in corn prices has come a little early this year. Hear why that is. Is there work going on behind the scenes to secure a new trade deal with China? And this week's analyst says basis is hot, hot, hot. We'll find out what that means. This week I sat down with Doug Simon, a commodity broker with Tredas, and got his answers on a wide range of topics.
The U.S., we were 6% planted last week, which is about half the typical pace, and beans were 2% planted, which is about half the typical pace. I've got farmers in Nebraska that are progressing pretty well, and I've got others that are just finishing up field work so they can start planting. We had some rain here in Nebraska last week, or earlier in this week, which actually probably helped some guys. But it's just one of those years where everybody said it's just a really weird start because we did have the floods, we had snow, we've had rain, and so we're probably ahead of where we thought we were going to be 3 weeks ago, though, because it has dried out and we've been able to move ahead a little bit.
And Doug, we got corn prices dropping too. Why is that?
Well, because everybody's going back to the fields. Like I was saying 3 weeks ago, I think there was maybe a little concern we were going to be delayed a little bit. I think that's, we're moving ahead, getting some progress there. And then also we just had more pressure, I think because of the crops in Brazil and Argentina are pretty good. We're getting some export competition there. That's an issue. People have not seen anything happen on the trade deal, and so you're basically seeing the funds continue to sell and pressure the market and move it lower as we go into first notice day on the May contract.
You see any rebound anytime soon?
Well, when you look at historical prices, you look at the April, kind of seasonal patterns, there tends to be a little positivity from April into May. I mean, we've had such a dramatic fall off. I'd like to kind of look at markets that revert back to their mean. Maybe we'll get a little bit of a jump back up. But, if we do get some type of a jump up, we want to make sure that we're kind of, make sure we're selling. From a marketing standpoint, basis levels right now are very, very, very strong. I think I've made comments to you that are hot, hot, hot.
Hot, hot, hot.
Yeah, so the levels at Columbus and Blair are 10 over the May board. And we're going to roll into July next week, and there's 9 cents a carry. And so I'd expect those basis numbers versus the July to firm up a little bit more. There's no ownership out in the country by the commercials. The farmers have got it in the bin. The funds are short, but usually with those commercials being that big of opposition, such extremes, there's usually some short covering at some point, but we'll have to see if that actually happens.
And we got soybeans planted about 1% nationwide. Current outlook there, what do you see?
Well, the soybean side of it really still resting on what's going on the trade talks, and hopefully we'll get something going there. But there's not a lot of optimism about soybean prices. We're the weather, given the fact that we're moving ahead. I think there were maybe some worry that we'd plant more beans because we wouldn't maybe plant corn. But now we're really not. We're going to get planted. It looks like it doesn't look like that's going to be a big issue. We're going to have a lot more bean acres.
And you touched on trade a second ago. I was reading some articles where it was talking about maybe a little bit of optimism when it comes to China. What do you think?
Well, there's not as much stuff coming from the president right now, but behind the scenes with Mnuchin and Leitner and Lighthizer and Greg Dowd, different people that are involved in the administration. I think behind the scenes they seem to be working pretty diligently. The other big deal is the Trans-Pacific Partnership that didn't pass. We need to be taking some actions there in terms of making sure we're doing those bilateral work with Japan, but with all the trading partners in Southern Asia, Southeast Asia, because our export competitors from Canada and Australia are very aggressive there and picking up market share there, and so that's important to us longer term as well.
And about 10 days ago, roughly 90 U.S. ag organizations signed a letter urging a trade deal between the U.S. and Japan. Looks like a deal on both sides. As they're wanting to get it done. What do you think?
Well, I think our farmers and the ag organizations, obviously, because they feel like, China is a big deal for us on the soybean side, but Japan is a large, one of the top 2 importers of corn, import beef, and Australia is hitting the beef market and the wheat market, and so we definitely want to be able to push that ahead and be able to do some things there.
What else you tracking internationally? Looks like African swine fever going to lessen the Brazil soybean exports to China.
That's a big deal. It's really hard to get a handle on what's with China, with the state-controlled news agency in terms of what's coming out of there. Foreign Ag Service had some numbers I saw that they said the herd would be down 19%, which wasn't as aggressive as maybe some of those 30% reductions. They've got a massive amount of hogs over there. That same Foreign Ag Service thing said that their pork production was only going to be down 5%, which that's somewhat encouraging for them, but it looks like that'll help us with our pork exports, probably help with beef exports, and if we ever get a trade deal going, I think there's opportunities for ethanol there. And their actual corn consumption in China was kind of interesting. Between their food and their seed and their industry uses, they're actually going to increase year over year. And so actually they'll have a net increase in consumption there. They're going to lose some to the hog side of it, to the feed side of it, but overall that's a little more encouraging from maybe the popular perceptions about China.
And you mentioned earlier basis. It's hot, hot, hot. Any other marketing or risk management tips that you want to leave us with today? One
of the things we look at corn is selling on a seasonal time frame and selling over increments, in the springtime, hopefully, by the time you get planted and then into June. So even though prices are lower here, if we do get some type of rebound, you've got some sold, you want to look at maybe averaging those prices together. One of the big things going on right now is when you look at spreads out into 2020. The Dees corn today is at 375. It gets back up to 385. Carries between that Dees and the March could get out toward 20 cents. So if you got a 385 and add 20 cents of that, be 405 the Dees, or that would be 405 versus the March. That's still a pretty good price. So you need to be looking at those opportunities. If we have any rebounds, to get some more price on new crop, both the corn and then also looking forward to the beans here at some point too.
Next week, Darren Newsom will be back on the show. If you have a question you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Multi-hybrid planters have garnered a lot of attention in the last several years, but often cost about $30,000 more than a conventional planter of the same size. In 2017, Central Valley Ag kicked off a series of research trials to evaluate ways to optimize the return on investment from multi-hybrid planter technology. CVA used a lower cost approach with a 1992 John Deere 7200 6-row planter retrofitted with precision planting V-set select units. This winter, CVA revamped another 7000 series planter, although this one is an 8-row and with a few extra features. Read about this planter rebuild in the April Nebraska Farmer. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we're almost into May. The old saying goes, April showers bring May flowers, but what does your forecast tell us?
Well, Troy, the old saying, April showers bring May flowers, is correct, but in this case, we have been seeing numerous April showers in northern Nebraska. Flowers are kind of hard to come by as we've been stuck in the cooler weather. The warmer conditions in southern Nebraska have brought out a flush of course, the flowers and the shrubs and the pollen. and we've had a lack of more significant moisture in the southern part of the state, so planting has taken off in earnest. Where the real issues lie is across the northern part of the state that has dealt with 3 precipitation events in this last week, the heaviest one occurring during the Wednesday through the Thursday time period, where we had anywhere from a 1/4 inch to upwards of 1 inch of moisture, anywhere from the north central portion of the state in through the northeastern part of the state. So as we go through this weekend, we do have the opportunity for some drier weather and windy conditions as the system that currently affecting us starts to push to the east. But once again, we turn our attention to next week, and some significant chances for precipitation exist almost on a daily basis through Thursday. So as we look at the upper air models, that wave that currently moved through the state is now pressing its way eastward. We're starting to see high pressure build in behind it, so the precipitation comes to wind in eastern Nebraska. We start to see clearing and windier conditions as high pressure settles in. That's going to keep some cooler conditions, particularly tomorrow morning into portions of northern Nebraska as we see a mix of rain and snow over northern Iowa. That's going to bring that cold air behind us, and don't be surprised to see scattered frost over the northern half of the state Sunday morning. And more importantly, another wave starts to make its way toward our region as we go through Sunday afternoon and evening as low pressure at the surface starts to develop in southwestern Kansas. We start to see that moisture breaking out during the day on Sunday, and that will progressively increase as it moves toward the east, with the main brunt of the activity pretty much across the areas that have been receiving the more significant moisture. Then that low pressure system moves into northern Wisconsin as we go into Monday, bringing all the more inclement weather with it. We get a slight break, and then when we start to see that trough digging in the western United States, ejecting out of the system as we go into the day on Tuesday. Low pressure once again starts to develop in the Texas Panhandle. That's going to get that moisture feed up toward the Central Plains, and we should see thunderstorms break out in Oklahoma and Kansas with more stratiform precipitation in western Nebraska. The trough tries to lift a little bit on Wednesday toward the Central Plains. Once again, that'll form another low pressure system ejecting out of that trough in southwest Kansas, a little bit farther toward the north. That's going to bring more significant stratiform precipitation to the northwestern Corn Belt and precipitation to the southeast, and then that wave over the overnight hours starts to move to eastern Nebraska, giving us a foundation for anywhere from a half to a 1/4 of an inch of precipitation, and then high pressure starts to firmly settle in during the day on Thursday, and we'll see this precipitation shield during the second half of the day move to the east. Friday we get a zonal flow, start to get some clearing conditions. Low pressure is shown at the surface in the northwestern Panhandle, but there's just no moisture feed that's going to be available to keep the system generating moisture across Nebraska. It will all be toward our south, and then it looks like we may have a little break as we go into next weekend in terms of precipitation. So the 8 to 14 day forecast does keep that cool air to our north and the warmth to the south. So anytime you have this big spread between above normal and below normal, guess where the storm track is? Laying it right across the central United States. So it does not look to me, Troy, like we are going to see a lot of activity planting next week. If we are going to see it, it's going to be in the more drier areas of the southern part of the state. But more importantly, it does look like an opportunity after next weekend for some planting to take place.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, how many glasses of milk does the average dairy cow produce per year? The answer is C, 46,000 glasses. That's equal to about 7 gallons a day. For our final story, preparing fields for planting often requires the use of a dicamba product. But understanding the best burn-down treatment to use and when to do it can be confusing. Nebraska Extension Weed Specialist Dr. Amit Jhala has some answers.
So burn-down herbicides are generally applied before planting crops. For example, if grower is going to plant corn or soybean, and if there are a lot of weeds are present at the time of planting, then it's a good idea to apply burn-down herbicides before planting, or like at least few days before planting, depending on which product you select.
And you've been getting some questions from growers who are clearing out their fields before planting soybeans. They want to know what dicamba product they can use as a burn down before planting. So what are the main things that they're trying to get rid of in their fields?
I received several questions this year because dicamba resistant soybean came to the market in 2017 growing season, and depending on which soybean variety you are going to plant, you can use dicamba product. For example, if you are going to plant Roundup Ready to Extend soybean, which is dicamba resistant soybean, you can use dicamba anytime, and you can plant soybean anytime, which is Roundup Ready to extend soybean. But if you are planning to plant, say, Liberty Link soybean or conventional soybean or any other type of soybean which is not resistant to dicamba, then we generally don't recommend to use dicamba-based product as a burn-down herbicide, because sometimes it may cause injury. And again, I would say burn-down herbicide is not needed for each and every field, but definitely needed if grower has some problem weeds. For example, mare's tail is very problematic, and if there are a lot of mare's tail population in the field, I would recommend to use burn-down herbicide. But if there are some henbeet or field pennycress or tansy mustard, those are very common winter annual weeds are here and there in the field, then I would not worry too much about using burn-down herbicides.
And of course, it's always important, read the label, different intervals. Go ahead and stress that if you like.
Yes, so you can apply any dicamba-based herbicide, but again, you have to check the label, because every label says different planting interval, particularly with soybean, if it is not resistant to dicamba. So yeah, growers may need to follow our articles we have written recently in CropWatch, or they may need to read the label if they decide to use dicamba-based product before planting soybean. And when it comes to corn, they can use dicamba-based product. Generally, the planting interval is about 7 to 14 days, depending on what rate and which product you are using as a burn-down herbicide for dicamba for corn.
Is it ever a good idea to mix Burndown with pre-emergent herbicide?
It depends when you want to apply your Burndown herbicide. For example, if you want to apply your Burndown herbicide now, and if you are not planning to plant your corn or soybean in a month or so, then I would recommend not to tank mix them. But as I told you, if you want to use Burndown herbicide and if you want to plant in next few days, then you can tank mix pre-emergence herbicide that can save your application time and cost to go to the field again.
For any questions you may have about how to control weeds, you're encouraged to contact your local extension office. You can also find more resources from Amit at cropwatch.unl.edu. That's going to do it for Market Journal this week. On our next show, we'll tell you the best way to dispose of those old pesticide containers. And if your fields were damaged by the flooding, you'll hear some ways to get them in better shape. Hope to see you right back here next time. Until then, I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.